Dear Rewind Reviewer, we regret to inform you that you have not been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall. It's been a few months since I was rejected from Hogwarts School for Witchcraft and Wizardry. Nothing big, just a small matter of me being a muggle. Since then I searched for answers, for ways to become magical. And I believe I found one that may help. Right. Let's see if this works. Is it true you can provide me with answers? Do you know how I can become a wizard? Can you tell me? Who are you? Why is that important? I am the Rewind Reviewer. Of course it doesn't work. Oh, fuck. Hello guys, welcome back to a slightly redecorated Rewind Reviews. Felt like I'd stuck with the original background for long enough, so just decided to sort of change it up a little bit. And coincidentally, it also happens to be the 50th episode on this channel, so I'm slightly amazed I've managed to actually do this many videos at this point in time. So I wanted to do something a little bit special. I wanted to do a film that was a huge part of my childhood growing up. I think it might have been one of the first proper big movies that I ever remember seeing on the cinema. So what we're going to be doing is returning to the wizarding world to look at Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Released in 2002, the cinematic adaptation of J.K. Rowling's Boy Wizard series continues, under the direction of Chris Columbus once again and adapted by Steve Kloves. The story this time sees Harry and his friends return to school for their second year at Hogwarts School for Witchcraft and Wizardry, where an ancient prophecy seems to be coming true when the mysterious presence begins stalking the corridors, leaving its victims paralysed. The sequel boasts an all-star cast including Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, Emma Watson, James and Oliver Phelps, Tom Felton, Robbie Coltrane, David Bradley, Alan Rickman, Richard Harris, Maggie Smith, John Cleese, Warwick Davis and Bonnie Wright, alongside a whole host of new faces including Julie Walters, Mark Williams, Jason Isaacs, Kenneth Branagh, Toby Jones, Miriam Margolyes and Shirley Henderson. So if you had the chance to watch my review for The Philosopher's Stone on this channel, then you're probably aware that I was a huge fan of this series growing up, and I still continue to be. I do think it is a really great story. I do think there are some fantastic characters and ideas, and as much as I loved the first one, it really took this one to really elevate the series for me, and this was one of my absolute favourites growing up. This was the first Harry Potter movie that I had actually seen on the cinema. I wasn't old enough to go and see the first one when that came out. It potentially might have been one of the biggest films I had actually seen at that point in time. I'm not quite sure because I still need to kind of go back on my history a little bit there, but I honestly can't remember what else was really sort of out around the time that sort of matched the scale of this one. I was also a lot more aware of the books as well at this point in time because like my mum was actually starting to read the books when the first movie had come out because of how much attention these were getting. And she started sort of telling me a little bit about what was going on in the second one because I really enjoyed the first one, so it was kind of interesting seeing what happens going forward. So I was aware that the books were a thing and that the movies were based on these books. But it took me a few years before I really got the chance to actually start reading these books. So I could only really sort of judge this story based on the two movies that we had at this point in time. As I said, I really did enjoy the first one when it first came out, and when the second one came out, that is when my obsession for the Harry Potter series really sort of took off because of how good that I thought this movie was. It introduces and expands so much on the Wizarding World and the story that we already are aware of. And I was really fascinated in where this story was ultimately going. So it's definitely a bit of a nostalgia trip actually getting to revisit this movie, considering I only really recently just did the first one to do my first review. So I very recently sat down to rewatch the second one, and my biggest question is this still as good as I remember it being, and is it genuinely better than the first one? Well, let's have a look. But just before I do need to mention that yes, my in the book counter is still in operation, and it's going to keep track of any time I make any comparisons between the books and the films. So starting off with the cast for this movie, this features a lot of returning faces including Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, Rupert Grint, Tom Felton. Majority of the teachers return to this movie as well. This had an incredible cast, and it's great that they have all managed to come back to do this one. When it comes to the main trio of Harry, Ron and Hermione, I do feel like their performances in this movie compared to what they were in The Philosopher's Stone, they have improved. Personally, I still do think that out of the three of them that Daniel Radcliffe is probably the weaker performer of the three, but he still does deliver a good performance as Harry. And with Emma Watson, she's able to explore different dimensions to Hermione that we never really got to see in the first one. They're able to explore a slightly more rule-breaking side to Hermione that we only really sort of glimpses of in the first movie, but I really like that they have sort of pushed it just a little bit further in this one, so it does feel like it is a nice progression. And through her, we're kind of able to see like the prejudice that the pure blood wizard families have towards the people who are muggle born. I do think those scenes are very well handled. I think Emma Watson does give a really good touching performance, and you do really feel for her. It is a very difficult subject to introduce into a movie that is primarily aimed at kids, but I do feel like they have found a way of introducing it very believably into this without it feeling forced, and I do think the performances really do enhance that, and I think that it is handled very well. And then when it comes to Rupert Grint as Ron Weasley, I think he is definitely the strongest out of the three main characters, and I feel like his performance in this one really does get amplified a little bit more in this because they sort of play up a few more comedic elements of Ron, and I really do appreciate that they have sort of gone into that because Rupert Grint is very talented, he is funny, I do like how they have handled the character. He does get some of the best moments and some of the best lines. I really do love what they have done with Ron in this one. One thing I did notice, especially when it comes to Harry and Ron in this movie, is, and it's something that I did notice all the way back in 2002 as well, they sound a bit odd because I think that their voices are ADR. They were 12 and 13 when they were making this movie, so yes, the voices would have been changing as they were making these films. And if you've seen something like Terminator 2, you know that when you are filming a movie with somebody who is quite young, who is going through those changes, and the voice is starting to kind of break and change, that it's not going to be a very consistent tone. So what they did in Terminator was they brought Edward Furlong back to basically record all of his lines through the use of ADR so that it was consistent throughout the whole film. And I do think that is what has happened in this one. It isn't very noticeable, but you do sort of notice that maybe the way that their voice inflections are doesn't 100% match up with everything that's going on screen. But then when it comes to a lot of the other returning characters, I think that every single person is on top form. I really love what every single person is able to bring to each of their roles, like Richard Harris as Dumbledore, who I still think is my favourite depiction of Dumbledore on screen. That is what I picture whenever I read the books. I like that we get to see a different side to the teachers this time around because of the very real threat to Hogwarts with this supposed creature that's on the loose. I really liked Alan Rickman in the first movie as Snape, but this is the one where I absolutely love the character because he just has this sort of way whenever he's on screen. He really is a bit of a scene stealer in this, because comparing to how he is in the first movie, he isn't really a focal point in this one. He is just one of the teachers, just like any of the other teachers were in the first movie. So he basically does have to try and do a few things just to kind of stand out a little bit. So I really do like what it is that he has done with this character. But a lot of the other characters who did have a presence in the first movie didn't really get an awful lot to do, but they did have enough of a screen presence that you do sort of know who the characters are. Like Robbie Coltrane as Hagrid, I think that they've expanded his role a little bit more in this one, and I like how much of a focus that he does get in this one. I really do love the character. I love Robbie Coltrane. It's really upsetting that he has very recently passed away. I think Hagrid is a really great character, and I think that what Robbie has done with this performance of the character, I think it is brilliant. And like Tom Felton as Malfoy, I think his role's definitely expanded a lot more in this one, with him being a bit more focal point this time around. And I think that he really has a great time with this role. I think that he is absolutely fantastic as Malfoy. I love that as soon as he's on screen, it's just like full on boo, because they really do amplify the rivalry that him and Harry have, and I do like how that is handled. And even though Bonnie Wright didn't have as much of a presence in the first movie, she only really had like 1 or 2 scenes in the entire film. This one, she is a very big part of this movie, and I'd like how her role has expanded a lot more. But then we also have a lot of newcomers coming into this as well, like Gilderoy Lockhart, played by Kenneth Branagh, who I love in this movie. I think he's so over the top and cheesy that it just works so well. I love Jason Isaacs as well. This is his introduction as Lucius Malfoy. I really love Jason Isaacs in this movie. I think he's a fantastic antagonist. In many ways, he feels a lot more threatening than any of the other baddies who have actually shown up in the Harry Potter movies up until this point. Plus we also get to kind of expand the Weasley family a little bit more. We only really saw glimpses of Fred and George and Percy, as well as Mrs. Weasley. In this one we actually get to properly meet the family, and we get to see Arthur Weasley for the first time. I think that it's a great introduction. I really love how they are together. I really love Mark Williams as Arthur Weasley. I think they really have, once again, absolutely nailed the casting for this, and I love the energy that each of these characters are able to bring to these roles. And I like how they do actually feel like proper grown-ups in this as well, because there is a scene in the books where Arthur and Lucius kind of get into a bit of a fight in Flourish and Blots, and it's like a proper fight. So I'm glad that that was changed to something that's just a bit more verbal. I think it does make a bit more sense. Plus we're also introduced to Colin Creevey as well, who does have a slightly bigger role in the books, but I do like his addition in this because he does add a little bit of levity to it, and he sort of adds a bit more of the shock factor to what ultimately is going on within the castle. I'm trying my best not to spoil this movie because you might not have seen it, but chances are you probably have, so I don't really know what it is I can and can't say. So I may let something slip every so often, but I'm going to try my best to try and be as spoiler free as possible. And then we also have the introduction of Moaning Myrtle. I think she is a really fun character. There is definitely a reason for her being the way that she is. You do get to see her backstory. I think that is expanded very well, and I think it is done very well within this film. Plus we also get the introduction of Dobby, who's one of my favourite Harry Potter characters. I'm really annoyed that they didn't really do an awful lot with him in regards to the whole series. But in terms of this movie, I think he is brilliant. I think Toby Jones is a perfect voice casting for him. Again, you are also introduced to another form of prejudice, with the wizards seeing themselves as above other creatures, with house elves being enslaved, and the way that Dobby dresses, the way he acts, the way he punishes himself whenever he says something that he's not supposed to, which up until you sort of find out what it is that's going on with him, it can be quite funny, but when you see what's going on with him and why he is the way he is, it is actually quite upsetting. And it is handled very well, and it is balanced out very well. The story this time around definitely feels a little bit bigger and a lot more expansive than it was in the first movie, because all the legwork's being done, all the setup, everything's been built up. You know how this world works, you know how the castle operates, you know what it is that they're there for. This time they're able to just jump straight into it, and they're able to just get on with the story that they want to tell. Unlike the first movie, there is a lot going on in this. There's a lot of subplots, lots of little twists and story points and everything. It does feel like a very big story. It can be a little bit expositional sometimes, again, like it was in the first movie, where there is a lot of information that you do need to understand and they do need to try and get across, but it does work, and it is handled very well, because they've got to sort of go into the history of the castle a little bit. They've got to sort of go into like the ghosts a bit more, as well as the introduction of the chamber, the new lessons that they go into, the new teachers, the new characters, all the stuff with Lockhart and a few other things that are going on at the same time. So there is a lot that is going on in this movie, and it is the longest movie of the entire series. It's about 2 hours 40. I know some people are going to say that the first movie was 3 hours long, but it technically wasn't, because that was actually an extended cut that I think was only released in the US. We over here in the UK only had a 2.5 hour version of the film, and I do feel like they could have had an extended version of this one, but probably is, because there are enough deleted scenes out there that I think that this will go over 3 hours, because there are scenes that are definitely extended. They are meant to be a lot longer, like the sequence in Borgin and Burke's where you are introduced to Lucius and Draco into this movie, as well as Lockhart's pop quiz all about himself. But it is just the right length of time to really sort of get across everything that this movie needs to do. So even though it does feel a little bit crammed, I do think that it is just right for this kind of movie. That being said, there are definitely a lot of things that are missing from this movie in terms of what happens in the books, because I do feel like this is probably the most accurate page-to-screen depiction of the entire Harry Potter series. And sometimes I do feel like that can get in the way a few times, because even though there are scenes where it is literally line for line exactly as it is in the books, it does feel like it doesn't take into account that it's kind of a different setting. Because one example is actually when Harry visits Dumbledore's office, and there's a scene where he sees the Sorting Hat, and then the Sorting Hat starts talking to him, and they have like a little bit of a back and forth. The dialogue between them is exactly as it is in the books, but the context is a little bit different, more so because in the books Harry actually is kind of questioning everything that's going on. There's a lot going on inside his head. So when he goes over to, he sees the Sorting Hat and he decides, am I genuinely a Gryffindor? Am I meant to be in Gryffindor, or was I meant to be in Slytherin? So he picks it up, puts it on, and then we get the line delivery and the back and forth between them, which does make a bit more sense compared to how it is in the first movie. But a lot of the changes I do feel are actually for the better, because it does kind of flow a little bit more smoothly. It does iron out a few of the little wrinkles here and there, because there are scenes where it does kind of go on just a bit too much, like the dueling club. There's a lot more going on in that sequence, even though it does kind of explain something just a little bit later on with regards to the Polyjuice potion, because there is something that Hermione is able to do that is cut from the movie. It isn't in the film whatsoever. And even though I like that they have sort of smoothed out the Halloween section in this one, so it does kind of bridge a little bit better between two different scenes, I am disappointed that we didn't get to see Nearly Headless Nick's death day, which is basically like this gigantic party where all the ghosts across Hogwarts all come to celebrate Nearly Headless Nick and the day he died. Because the ghosts are actually quite important characters to these stories, and I feel like they don't really get as much focus as I think that they really deserve. And that includes one character who I completely forgot to mention in my Philosopher's Stone review, but I think I've got a bit of time to really sort of mention this now. In the books and in the games, there is a character, a ghost, who is in every single story that was originally meant to be in the first movie. They had cast him, I believe they did do costumes, they actually filmed scenes with him, but for some reason they were cut and they were never released. That character is Peeves the Poltergeist. He's a character who appears in every single book, and if you have played the games you will have encountered him somewhere along the line, but he never got to appear in the films, which is a big disappointment, because he is a really fun character, and the person that they got to play him was Rick Mayall. He really is the perfect choice to play this role. I'm really disappointed that we never have got to see those scenes, so I really hope that one day Warner Brothers do release them. But that being said, I do understand why a character like him wasn't really included in these movies, because they do get a lot darker and a lot more mature as the series goes on, and I don't feel like a character like that would really sort of fit in with those stories. And this one is kind of in the middle ground, because it is still the last family friendly movie of the entire series, but it does get darker, it does get a little bit more mature and a bit more grown up. The series is in a very unique position to basically age alongside the characters and actors, and that's something that we do get to explore. We get to see the characters growing, and that does provide opportunities for the stories to get a little bit more mature and a lot creepier as well. Even though Philosopher's Stone did have those moments where it did start getting just a little bit more eerie, and it was able to sort of push things into a slightly more horrifying direction, This one does it a little bit more. Like the scene when they go down into Nocturne Alley, which is like this slightly more like run down version of Diagon Alley, which is like literally just down the road from it. The voices that Harry hears throughout the castle, the basilisk and what it's able to do to its victims, as well as the spiders and aragog, which are just, oh no. I'm not a humongous fan of spiders, to be honest, and I feel like this movie definitely did contribute to that a little bit. And up until 2021, I always thought Ron's line about "Company Full of the Butterflies" being one of the funnier lines of the movie, but after Peacemaker came out, I don't think following butterflies is the best idea. But I really do like what it is that they are able to add into this movie, because they are really building out this world so much more. We get to explore so many new aspects to this world. Because on top of all the magical creatures that we're introduced to into this film, like Forks, who I absolutely love. I love Phoenixes. I think he's definitely one of the best creatures within these films. We also get to explore a lot of new places within the castle as well as the grounds, and I think that that's handled really well. And it really does help because this story does focus a lot on the history of Hogwarts, so we do get to explore some of the more older side of this castle. I genuinely love the locations that they have picked for this movie. All the castles that they did use throughout the UK, as well as all the sets that they've made, are absolutely fantastic. All these sets that they have made, they really bring this world to life in a way that I don't think CGI really ever could. It really does add to the history of this world and this place, and I really do appreciate the detail that's gone into it. And I really do love how practical this movie is as well. Like the first movie did have a lot of practical elements. This one really does double down on how much it's able to use. And that includes a lot of the creatures like Forks, who sometimes is CGI, sometimes is a puppet, and it is a bit of a blur between the two. You can sometimes tell that he is CG, but the actual puppet that they have used of him is so good and so detailed. I really do love it. And then the sets, when it comes to like Aragog's Hollow, and even just Aragog himself is just like this gigantic puppet spider. It's absolutely horrible to see. If you're like me and you're not really a big fan of spiders, I'd probably avoid staying out of the forest if you ever go to the studio tour in London. As I said, Dumbledore's office is definitely my favourite of the newer additions to this movie, because I really do love all the history, like all the paintings, all the little objects and trinkets and all sorts dotted around. But I think that the Chamber of Secrets itself is this really great, highly detailed area, because it's so big and it's so imposing. The doorway is just fantastic. I absolutely love what they're able to do with that, and that extends to the basilisk as well, which again is a mixture of CG and puppetry, and it is a blur between the two. I really do think that the actual puppetry is quite scary, but I think that it does help because it does need to be an intense sequence, and I do think that having it actually physically be in there does help with that, and it is a very tense sequence, especially for a kid. But it isn't all doom and gloom, as I said. Like, yes, this movie is definitely a lot darker than it was in the first movie, but it does have quite a lot of humour in this one. This is certainly a lot funnier than the first film. Like Ron getting freaked out over the spiders and a few other things, I think can add to the humour of this movie. I love when Colin just sort of pops up at random taking pictures of people. I love the sequence with the Howler, with the Weasleys, when like they're getting told off by Mrs. Weasley, and then Arthur comes in, she tells them what they've all done, and then he's like, oh really? How'd it go? I think Lockhart's a really great addition to this movie. I think he really does provide some of the funniest scenes in this. Some of the lessons can definitely be a bit of a laugh, as well as the slug spell that Ron tries to cast and ends up burping up slug spells a bit of the movie. But I will say, when it comes to the spell casting in this movie, even though there is actually a lot more spells in this movie, including Harry actually getting to cast spells in this one this time around, I do wish there was a bit more variety to what it is that the spells can actually do, because you don't really see them really do that much outside of the one that they use in the forest. Because like during a dueling club, they are casting a lot of different spells, and only really one of them stands out as its own thing. Everything else just kind of looks the same. So I would have liked a little bit more variety when it comes to that. That being said, I do think that there are a few cheesier elements in this. Like there's a few scenes where like the lighting sort of played up more to kind of play up like the sinister side of characters. Plus there's a few lines here and there that just sort of add to that cheesiness. It doesn't really bother me, in fact, it just sort of adds to the charm of this movie, and I think that it is handled very well, and I do think that it all fits very well. And I think when it comes to the mystery for this film, the main driving force of this film is the mystery of the Chamber of Secrets and what it actually contains, and that dominates the story for this, and I think that it is handled very well. I like that it is the most prominent thing in this film. It's full of twists and turns. I think that there are definitely a lot of aspects that I feel like if you haven't seen this movie before, you will not be expecting. And even though I do like how it is all wrapped up, I do feel like it is a little convoluted how it all sort of does knit together in the way that it does, but it doesn't really bother me that much, and I still really do enjoy it. There is one scene that I'm never quite sure on, and that's basically a scene where you see Draco in the bookstore and he like rips out a page from one of the books. And it's such a prominent thing in the foreground that it just feels a bit strange why that doesn't sort of play into the story, because it is so prominent when it actually does happen that you sort of expect it to be a bit more important, but it's never even addressed again. There are fan theories, but I'm not quite sure on them. When it comes to the effects of this movie, the special effects, Chris Columbus, the director, is on record in saying that he did not like how the effects looked in the first movie, and I will admit that they do look dated today. Not a lot of them, but a few of them do. But when it comes to this movie, 20 years later, these effects still look incredible. There are scenes where you cannot tell what is CG and what isn't. There's a few scenes with the Ford Anglia car where it's like flying in the sky and then it like touches down on the ground, and you cannot tell when it goes from CG into live action. It is that smooth. Dobby's quite a prominent character in this as well, and he is completely a CGI creation. Bear in mind, this is the exact same year that we were introduced to Gollum in The Two Towers, so that's pretty big competition, and I think Dobby does hold up pretty well, especially in the way that people interact with him, with the way that like Harry grabs hold of his vest at one point, and I don't know how exactly they do it. It is really well handled, and even like when Dobby's moving around, like you've got to try and keep eye line with him to make sure that it really does sell that he is a living being, and I think that the way that they've handled that is very believable, and I think that the eye lines are spot on. I was keeping an eye on it when I was rewatching this, and it is spot on. All of the effects really have improved quite significantly in this movie, and I really think that this has some of the best effects in the entire series. One of my favourites is actually the Polyjuice potion, where they're able to kind of turn from one person into another, and it's like this bubbling effect on the skin. It's really clever, and it's kind of creepy when you see it for the first time, and I think that it is a very unique transition that you never really have seen on screen. Like we've had things like Mystique and things like that, but we've never seen something like this. It is really good, and it is a really good adaptation of that scene. There's even a scene where Harry ends up getting sucked into this diary, and because it's a memory, it's all in like this chromatic look, where it's all sort of like in like this horrible sort of greeny sort of look, and it's all like monotone and black and white, and it looks really good. But then there's a really subtle effect that they do when you see Harry. He is still in like this candlelight, is how he looks when he goes into the diary, and it's a really subtle effect, and I think it is handled really nicely. And when it comes to the music, John Williams returns once again to do the score for this movie, and I really loved what he did in the first movie, and he does continue a lot of those themes in this one. There's just a slightly more darker edge to them. I wouldn't necessarily say it was atmospheric, but it really does add to the mood of this film. Some really fun new quirky themes that he's added into this, and as well as the reprisals of a lot of the older themes, and I think it's merged together very well, so it does feel like a very cohesive soundtrack. Overall, I think this is a fantastic movie. This is definitely the best of the two Chris Columbus movies. I don't know if I'd say it was the absolute best Harry Potter film, but it's definitely one of the better ones that has been made. Everything about this movie does work very well, from the casting, the music, the sets, the effects. Everything about this really has landed, and I think that in some aspects it has improved a lot over the first film. This is a must watch for families. I do feel like if you are somebody who does have kids, or somebody who does enjoy fantasy movies, I think this is definitely for you, and I highly encourage you to check it out. So with all that being said, my rating for Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets is a 9 out of 10. I really had a lot of fun getting to revisit this movie, and I'm really looking forward to getting to revisit the others as well. Well, that's pretty much everything I've got to say for this episode, so thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this content, please like, please subscribe, hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that's going on here. If you've seen the movie, let me know down in the comments what you think about it. Also, if you have any suggestions for any future rewinds you want me to do, whether it's film, TV, games, let me know down in the comments. This channel's been going for about 8 months now, and I'm amazed that I've managed to make it up to 50 episodes, and that people are watching, they are engaging. I really have appreciated all the support that I have got since then, and I really can't thank you enough. So once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Rewind Reviews. Mischief managed.